You're watching Scriptease. In today's episode, we're looking at the Screenwriter's Toolkit. The screenwriter's task is crafting a plot featuring characters that will inevitably explore a theme through the filter of a tone. In other words, a story. A novelist or playwright is charged with the same task, but different writers are bound by different constraints and different goals for their creations. A novel stands alone, whereas a play or screenplay is intended to be converted into a visual medium. As we so often do when discussing writing, let's talk about this in mechanical terms. We refer to stories as vehicles for messages, and this vehicular story is composed of literary devices, such as symbols, similes, and suspense. Different vehicles, that is, novels, screenplays, or plays, can utilize the same devices, but they often require different tools to put them together. So what tools does the screenwriter have at their disposal? How can we make the best use of these tools, and where do we get these tools from? Roughly speaking, there are three types of screenwriting tools: diction, order, and format. Diction is word choice, the selected subset of the writer's vocabulary appropriate for telling a given story. Order is the arrangement of these words. This could be within a sentence, or the sequence of the sentences themselves. Format is the shape of text on the page, the way the text appears to the reader physically. Using these three tools, a screenwriter can create entirely different tones, evoking different emotions in the reader. You may think that the reader's emotions are determined by the content of the story, the plot. If the sports team wins the match, then it's happy. If they lose, it's sad. And for the large part, yeah, you'd be correct. But by no means is plot the be-all end-all. Take, for example, scenes involving a car crash. One could be thrilling, another horrific, and yet another light-hearted. Now, of course, yes, the emotion of the scene is affected by our relationship to the victim. If some no-name bad guy in a paragliding snowmobile flies off a cliff, then we probably won't feel as emotionally impacted as if the movie's love interest gets suddenly T-boned. But using our screenwriting tools, we can strengthen or manipulate the intended feeling of the scene. To prove this, let's look at some car crash scenes from three different titles: Final Destination 2, Yu Yu Hakusho, and If I Stay. All three titles feature a very similar context and outcome from their car crash scenes. In each of them, the young student protagonist is killed, and this death acts as the inciting incident for their story. Yet despite these strong similarities, each title evokes a very different feeling in the audience. Final Destination 2 is a slasher flick. The movie opens with a horrific highway pile-up spectacle, a promise of the gruesome and absurd death scenes to come. This turns out to be a vision which our protagonist, college student Kimberly Corman, uses to cheat death. She soon finds out, however, that death plans on claiming every person who is supposed to die that day, putting her life in the balance. Yu Yu Hakusho is an action anime with comedic and supernatural elements. The series opens with our protagonist, delinquent high school student Urameshi Yusuke, saving a child from being hit by a car. Urameshi dies, propelling him into a supernatural journey with his first task to come back to life. If I Stay is a teen romantic drama film. We learn a little bit about our protagonist, Mia Hall, and her skill as a cello player. This promising future is cut short when Mia and her family are injured in a car crash. Mia is plunged into a coma, and through an out-of-body experience must decide if she wants to hold on to life or let go and die. So now we know a bit about each of our stories, our challenge is to differentiate their tones on paper. We can't rely on weepy soundtracks or spectacular visual effects to get across our message. We need to deal in cold, hard text. Before we attempt this challenge, let's learn about our screenwriting tools. First up, diction. Word choice is the most powerful tool available to the screenwriter. The choice of words can completely transform the feeling of a place, object, or action. A shriek is more horrifying than a scream, which is more fearful than a shout, which is more urgent than a yell, which is even then more serious than a holler. Despite these words representing very similar ideas, they all have very different connotations. You might hear a shriek in a slasher flick, but a holler in a screwball comedy. Hey, bada, 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 so bada. Put simply, diction is amazing at signaling genre. The opening pages of a script are often packed with these genre-defining words, setting the tone right off the bat. In The Ring, a horror movie, the opening death scene crackles with dangerous words. The girls in the perfume commercial get zapped from the TV when the channel changes. The sound of the phone ringing is sharp and shrill. It makes you think of a knife suddenly cutting something off, makes your neck tense up. The scene also draws on primal fears. Forests of wires snake into the blackness. This sentence is describing the mechanism of a VCR, but the words place you in the deep, dark woods. This snake motif is repeated later with regards to technology. The white noise of the TV is described as the hiss of static. A snake's hiss is the anticipation of danger, perfectly suited for this scene. Of course, we can also define other genres with a different set of words. In Mean Girls, a comedy, we get silly words. Her mum is the kind of woman who would still wear a fanny pack, and the girl at the spelling bee is spazzy looking. The overweight girl hiding out in her car at school is eating Egg McMuffins. I'm not saying any of these words make us fall out of our chairs with laughter, just that they keep the tone light. Diction can also be used to create symbols. When we see the same word repeated throughout a script, we come to associate it with an idea or theme. In American Beauty, the word smile becomes one such symbol. Fake smiles are ugly, they're meant to deceive or manipulate. Look at the word smile when associated with Carolyn. Her sales smile is used to hide her unhappiness. She puts on a joyful facade when in reality she's depressed. Real smiles, however, are beautiful. They show a selfless, unbridled happiness. Lester smiles in his fantasies and then slowly smiles more and more as his fantasies are realized. The fast food place where Lester works to recapture his days as a teenager is even called Mr. Smiley's. Quick spoiler warning for the end of the film. Skip to this time if you want to avoid the spoiler. All good? Good. After Lester is shot, Ricky finds his body slumped forward on the table, but he's still smiling. And Ricky, our barometer for beauty in the script, is only capable of an awed whisper. To him, this smile, despite its macabre circumstances, is the most beautiful thing so far. The smile has fulfilled its purpose as a symbol. Let's move on to order. Word order serves one main function: conveyance. The job of a screenwriter is to place images and emotions in the reader's mind and heart. Putting words in a logical order is more certain to create the correct image in the reader's mind. But being more abstract with the word order can create more powerful emotions, driving home the essential feelings of an action. Think of order in a script like camera work in a film. The camera directs audience attention, choosing what the audience focuses on. With word order, the writer decides, do we want the audience to focus on image or emotion? Clarity of image is essential in action sequences. We need to follow the chain of causation. In the opening bank robbery sequence from The Dark Knight, our attention is focused on the logistics of 5 robbers in clown masks as they steal the money and get killed off one by one. There's a lot of moving parts, so the script uses simple structure and short sentences to paint a clear image. Look at this sequence. Each sentence covers a single action by one of the characters, and each action is a response to the one immediately preceding it. Clarity of emotion gets the reader invested in the feeling of a scene. In the same bank robbery sequence from The Dark Knight, our attention is drawn to the emotion of the moment instead. Look at this line. Bozo and Grumpy move down the line of hostages. Bozo hands each hostage objects from a bag. A grenade. Grumpy follows, pulling the pins. Now compare with this rearranged version. Bozo and Grumpy move down the line of hostages. Bozo hands each hostage a grenade from a bag as Grumpy follows, pulling the pins. The second version doesn't have quite the same weight because it doesn't hold back knowledge of what objects are being handed to the hostages. It almost seems pedestrian, as though this is a usual act we see in bank robbery scenes. The first version, however, emphasizes this as a monstrous act, demonstrating the robbers' ruthless natures. Maximizing the imagery and emotion of a sequence in the most concise way possible is the ultimate goal of order. Lastly, we have format, the appearance of our text on the page from a macro viewpoint. The format of a screenplay is at once the most restrictive component of screenwriting and also one of screenwriting's most defining traits. The industry standard screenplay format reads as a list of seemingly arbitrary numbers. 12-point Courier font, 1.5-inch left margin, 1-inch margins on the right, top and bottom, approximately 55 lines, dialogue names 3.7 inches from the left, parentheticals 3.1 inches from the left, and dialogue 2.5 inches from the left. All of these measurements exist to control one thing: pacing. With all of these values put into practice, one page approximates 1 minute of screen time. If you hand me a 110-page screenplay, I'd expect to end up with a 1 hour 50-minute runtime. These may seem like restrictive rules, but think of them as creative constraints. If one page is 1 minute, then altering the density of text on a page will change the pacing of the action. An action sequence with more text on the page, a dense scene, will probably have faster cuts with more motions going on per second. Therefore, it will feel hectic, and each individual action will probably be less vital to the plot. Diving back into The Dark Knight, let's look at this fight scene between Batman, the Scarecrow, drug traffickers, and Batman imposters. This page is very dense. Almost every line of action is full, and the paragraphs are about 3 lines long on average. And this makes sense. There's a lot going on here, but the consequences of the actions aren't that important to the plot. The intention of the action here is to show that Batman is a badass who can clean up small-timers with ease. On the other hand, an action sequence with less text on the page, a sparse scene, will probably be slower with fewer motions. Therefore, it will feel tense, and each individual action will probably be more vital to the plot. Look at this sequence in the horror film Annabelle. The characters go from hearing a murder to investigating, then being confronted by the killers, fighting, and finally being rescued. The 8-page sequence is incredibly sparse. Each moment feels tense, with the action being drip-fed to us, an appropriate pace for a horror film. This pacing business may seem trivial, but understanding format is pivotal to engaging your reader. A slab of text is usually used for establishing a setting or describing an intricate set piece. A single word on a whole line of action text, however, draws the reader's eye, indicating significance to the plot. It's handy to know what effect the shape of your text has on the reader and keeping your reader engaged by mixing it up. It's worth noting there are plenty of other ways to change the look of your text on the page, like punctuation and capitalization, but we'll look at those techniques another day. So now we understand diction, order, and format, let's use them to draft up some car crash scenes for our 3 titles. For the record, with all 3 titles, I've watched the scenes, but I haven't read any of the scenes in their original screenplay form, or the manga in the case of Yu Yu Hakusho, so I'm trying to reverse engineer each scene into written form. Let's start with Final Destination 2. It's a slasher film with spectacle. The highway pileup is an action sequence with plenty of moving parts, so we'll want to maintain clarity of image. Here's a scene I wrote up using the tools mentioned in this video. My philosophy going into this was to make the action as clear as possible, while emphasizing the gruesome deaths of the characters. To that end, a lot of the diction and order is fairly simple. Most of the vocabulary tries to hype up the speed and intensity of the accidents occurring, as well as the reckless, panicked behavior of the drivers. Let's look at the opening line. A logging truck rattles down a wet 4-lane highway, shadowed by a series of cars. Rattles gives a sense of speed that's on the verge of losing control. I used shadowed as an alternative to followed to give the scene a darker, foreboding tone. The word order is simple, logical. I decided that the cars and their relative positions to one another were the most important detail of this setup, so I placed the cars at the beginning and end of the sentence. You could try emphasizing wet 4-lane highway instead, like this. Or this. My personal taste prefers the first variation I provided, but of course that's the beauty of writing. You can make your own choice. As for formatting, I let the cars dictate how I broke up my action. Like in this sequence, where the action cuts from the subcompact to the logging truck to the Chevy to the Firebird and finally back to the logging truck. I felt this kept the action as clear as possible while letting my diction do the work of conveying the chaos of the scene, with words like erupting, spinning, and careens. Now let's tackle Yu Yu Hakusho. The series has many comedic elements to it and a strong supernatural storyline, so this opening car crash scene needs to make light of the situation. I think of the first half of this scene, before the titles come in, as a kind of grim setup followed by a punchline. Look at the diction I've used. The moment of impact is described as a thump, with the body bouncing off the windshield. It's much lighter than the crushing or smashing of the Final Destination 2 scene. After Urumeshi's eyes open, we get a series of silly words to take the sting out of what just happened. The world is topsy-turvy, Urumeshi plays out a gag from a Wile E. Coyote cartoon, and Urumeshi's death is referred to as a predicament. We get the definite sense that he's gonna be alright. Of course, the narrator's line does a lot of the heavy lifting here. But even this line is strengthened by order, in this case, sentence order. By breaking up the narrator's line with Urumeshi's gag, the second half becomes a punchline. Also, look at how the top half of this page compares with the bottom half. The top half is sparse, more serious, while the bottom half is denser, relieving the tension. Finally, we have If I Stay. This scene is by far the saddest of the three. First of all, we get to know Mia much better than Kimberly or Urameshi before the actual car crash. We know she has a future as a musician, and we know she has someone she loves. This scene is about a promising life being cut short, loss and confusion. I tried to use diction and order that focuses on the emotion of the situation rather than on the mechanics of the incident. One way was to amplify the bleak serenity of the setting. For example, repeating grey sky helps to symbolize the hopelessness of the moment, the somber tranquility. The sounds of the car crash are lost among the mountains, and the car wreck rests upside down. The energy of the scene is further reflected in the temperature. Everything is cold, blanketed in snow. Compare this to Final Destination 2, where cars are bursting into flame and the driver of the Firebird is roasting alive. Look at this section. Why she's so cold is put at the end of the sentence to imply a greater meaning. She's cold not because of the snow, but because she's dead. The second section reinforces this idea of death. Dry, crushed leaves are lifeless, and the faint smoke is spirit-like. In terms of formatting, the actual crash itself is a series of short sentences implying rapid cuts and sudden action. Of course, this is heavily foreshadowed by Mia's narration, making the turn of events far less jarring. Taken together, the action is allowed to happen quickly and logically before moving on to the effects of the crash. There you have it. Final Destination 2, Yu Yu Hakusho, and If I Stay. 3 car crash scenes in which our young protagonist dies with 3 entirely different tones. That, my friends, is the potential of the screenwriter's tools. I've just taken a brief look at my attempted scene adaptations here, but if you want to look over the scenes in full for review or analysis, then I'll have links to each scene in the description below. So that's it. You can go off and write screenplays now that you know all the tools. Oh, if only. Let's go back to our mechanical analogy. Just because you know what a wrench does, or a screwdriver, or a blowtorch, doesn't mean you're going to go off and build an Aston Martin. Heck, what you build with the knowledge from this video won't even be a crappy Honda Civic. But you can try to build it, and when it blows up in your face, you can dust yourself off and try again, a little bit wiser for the attempt. May I suggest that while you're doing this repeated experimentation, learn from the people who have tried and failed before you. Milk this information, make it your own. You may have a rough understanding of how to get to the finished product, but you can still find faster, cleaner, better ways to get there. These little refinements have been unearthed by expert writers over shared millennia of screenwriting experience. Study them, make use of them. That's what I'll be doing here on Scriptease. Good writing and good luck.